Hey, I have just a few announcements and we'll get right to the main reasons that we're here. The first one I need to make is that we are presently in our membership renewal campaign. This is really important, particularly with some of the midterm elections that are coming up, which are of particular interest because of the redistricting. The redistricting has changed the game a great deal. Previously, very safe blue districts are not as safe anymore. Conversely, there are previously safe Republican districts, which are vulnerable. So these first elections of the newly redistricted jurisdictions are going to be a really big deal and will set the tone for the next 10 years, really. So, sorry, I have a cockatoo who's contributing to the conversation here. Joining now and getting involved now is going to be particularly important. So if you haven't joined, please, you can do so on Act Blue. Marcy is kind of leading our charge on that. If you have any questions at all, thank you. If you have any questions at all about membership, please, you can direct them to me or Marcy, who's up there with the blue background. That's fitting, blue background. We have different kinds of memberships, different levels of memberships. We have memberships for couples, individuals, students, and so on. So everybody, please join. If you're here attending this meeting, as far as I'm concerned, you ought to join if you haven't. I'm not going to say any names here. So that's my first announcement. My other announcement is going to be that every year we nominate a member of the club to receive what's called the Bosworth Award. This is for extraordinary service and for someone who really deserves recognition. This year we have nominated, and it was a unanimous nomination, Michael Finlan. Sometimes Michael can't make it because of his job, but Michael is absolutely a stalwart soldier. He is what I wrote in our nomination form. He's part of the glue that holds the club together. He's chairman of our endorsement committee. He recently put together a panel on the upcoming sheriff's election, which is very important. And the panel was so well received at our meeting that one of the other Dem clubs asked Michael to repeat it in front of their members. So Michael, I can't think of anybody who is more deserving of it. So he has been nominated for the Bosworth Award in that regard. We are going to start out the meeting with, we have present two candidates for the new Congressional District 42 here today, Brandon Mosley and Will Rollins. This is going to be a very short hello introduction. They will be back when we start the endorsement process, and we'll have more of a chance to talk to them in depth and find out more about their platforms and who they are and what they want and why they're running. But I told them they could each have a couple of minutes here to introduce themselves to us today. So Brandon, you contacted me first, so I'm going to let you go first, and then Will, you'll have your shot. So Brandon, you got a few minutes. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Well, everyone, my name is Brandon Mosley. Thank you for having me, and I have the pleasure and honor of running for the California 41st District. We started this campaign back in May. We've been able to build an amazing grassroots campaign, the likes of thousands of people across the district and across the country supporting our campaign, and nearly 25 elected officials supporting our campaign, some of them being Lisa Middleton, Christy Holstich, and Sabrina Cervantes, to say a few. But really, I tell people this campaign didn't start back in May. It started nearly 30 years ago, and not saying At 5 years old, I was trying to run for Congress, but nearly 30 years ago, Ken Calvert ran and won and been sitting in the seat of power, preventing progress for nearly 30 years. And Dr. King says that we're at a crossroads. He said that back in 1968. He said we can go one or two places, community or chaos. And right now, with Ken Calvert, he's leaning and taking us towards chaos by lying January 6th against democracy clear. But the Democratic Party, we want to go towards community unity, where there's going to be a diverse cloud of people that's going to carry the day at the end of it. But I truly believe that when my parents came to Riverside County, we came here with a dream in mind. And I started servicing people from the very day I started preaching at the age of 6, mentoring people. And that's where I fell in love with service. And Dr. King that says that anyone can be great because anyone can serve. All you need is a heart full of grace and a soul full of love. And I think it's time for us to send someone great to Congress, not great because of money, not great because of position, great because they love serving people at the end of the day. I went to school, a college back in LA, and I was the first to go to college in my family. And I went to college on this thing called a Hope Scholarship. And this Hope Scholarship didn't come with any money. It came with me hoping and praying that I was going to find a way to pay for college. And I started working at Nordstrom full-time, 40 hours a week. But all of a sudden, this thing called the Great Recession hit, and I found myself taking out loans that I'm still paying for today. I was in my apartment trying to figure out how I was going to pay for books and pay for groceries all at the same time. And that's why I became a teacher, because I didn't want students to face that same issue, sitting on the doorstep of poverty in the wealthiest nation in the world and mortgaging their future because they want to live that American dream. And when I became a teacher, I also became an adult educator, and I started helping those who are coming over, immigrating over from other countries to find their American dream through a high school diploma. Like my grandfather who came over from Bahamas Islands at 18 years old, first job picking oranges, second one picking apples. He was a migrant worker. He worked hard to purchase his first home and live that American dream in Compton, California, being one of the first African Americans to buy a home there. But here's the deal. Nowadays, working hard does not equate to receiving that American dream anymore. The chips are stacked up against working class people. They feel every time they go to the grocery store and they have to decide what they can pay for and what they have to put away. They feel it every time that they put gas in their tank and they can't afford it. And what we have in today's society, that the average Congress member is a millionaire. And we have millionaires making decisions for working class people and billionaires trying to race to space. This is not where we need to be in America today. What we need more working class people who are willing to fight and advocate for people like you and I. I can tell you this much, that this American dream that my grandfather so fought for is becoming out of reach for so many people, and we have to fight to make sure it comes back to the ground for all of us. And at the end of the day, there's
Brandon, can
yeah.
you kind of wrap it up here?
Yeah, here's my last. If I could just say this, when you get to heaven, it's an amazing story. When you get to heaven, they're going to say, "Show me your scars." And if you have no scars to show them, they're going to ask you, was there nothing on earth worth fighting for? I believe working class people are worth fighting for. Women reproductive rights are worth fighting for. I believe healthcare and the environment is worth fighting for. Please follow me at Mosley for Congress or BrandonMosley.com, where you can see the full platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you in the future as a local Dem. Will, take some time and tell us about you and your campaign briefly, please.
Thank you, Stephen. And it's great to see some familiar and new faces on the Zoom today. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I thought I would just take a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about why I'm running to unseat the January 6th Republican who's now right here in our backyard. So I grew up wanting to work in national security because of 9/11, walked into my first class of the day, saw my fellow Americans covered in ash on TV, and the North Tower collapse. That had a really powerful impact on me as a 16-year-old kid. And from that moment on, I knew I wanted to serve my country. There was just one problem. I was a closeted gay kid when it was still against the law to serve openly in the military, but I didn't let that stop me. Worked my ass off, went to Dartmouth and Columbia Law School, and eventually got a job as a federal prosecutor in the Central District of California, which covers all of Riverside County, including the new Congressional District 41. And it was a true privilege and honor to be a part of the team that helps protect us from adversaries like Russia, China, and Al-Qaeda. But working in counterterrorism these past few years, I started to notice a new threat, one that came from domestic terrorists, whether it was our office going after the white supremacists who attacked Charlottesville, whether it was our office going after QAnon conspiracy theorists who attacked US Navy hospital ships because they thought COVID was part of a government conspiracy, or whether it was responding to the Capitol attack on January 6th. And it was that new set of images, the images of guns drawn on the floor of the US House of Representatives, that inspired me to run against Ken Calvert. Because after I prosecuted some of the insurrectionists who attacked the US Capitol, I knew that I could not sit on the sidelines and let this January 6th Republican who voted to overturn the presidential election sit in Congress anymore. And so if we truly care about our democracy, if we truly care about something as fundamental as the freedom to choose our own leaders, all of us have an obligation and a duty to fight against the far-right forces that led to that attack in the first place. And so I'm running for Congress because I want to propose specific new laws that are designed to break down the polarized disinformation echo chambers online, on TV, and on social media that are making it impossible for the country to govern itself. And when we finally update those laws to address 21st century technology, I think we can actually shine a light on the true fact that people like my opponent, Ken Calvert, are a threat to our democracy. He's not only spread lies about the election and voted to overturn it, he has actually called for charges against the insurrectionists to be dropped. And of course, not only setting aside his post-January 6th reaction, he's got one of the worst records on climate, worst records on LGBTQ rights. He's against basic universal background checks for guns, and he's anti-choice. So I left my job to run for Congress because I think we need a new generation of leaders to step up and fight for the United States against Calvert's brand of far-right extremism. And we need people with specific new laws to create systemic compromise instead of systemic division. But most urgently of all, we need to unite against the people who undermine democracy, voting rights, and basic human rights in 2022, because the people who enabled the attack on the United States Capitol do not deserve to work inside of it. Thank you guys very much for having me, and really appreciate speaking and meeting with everybody today virtually.
Thanks very much, Will and Brandon. The only thing I will say about Mr. Calvert is I actually ran for Congress in 2018 in the primary, and the person I ran against, some of you may have heard of her. She's also been in there over 30 years. Her name's Nancy Pelosi. Obviously a different kind of primary, but it does, I think, talk about the effect of people who essentially have permanent seats. I'm an advocate of term limits, federal term limits. That's problematically legal because it would require, I believe, a constitutional amendment, perhaps. There's even debate about that. But I greatly admire both of you for taking on what you're doing. And I look forward to working with both of you in the future, particularly on our endorsement process that's coming up. Thank you very much. You're welcome to stick around and listen to Rabbi David Lazar, who's a fabulous speaker. And you're also encouraged to join our club, which I hope you will consider doing. All right, my next announcement is a little housekeeping here. We have e-board elections coming up. There are 3 open seats right now. Those are executive secretary, programs chair, and another one, hospitality and events. Frankly, the hospitality and events chair was designed to mostly address physical meetings, which have not been occurring for a while. So that's kind of a title without a job right now. But in a week, I will send out to all the members a slate of who is running for the executive board, and we will vote on it at our next general meeting in February. But this is an opportunity in the next week, if any of you, or even people who are not here, wish to nominate somebody else or self-nominate for any of those positions, secretary programs, or hospitality, please let me know within 1 week. And I will add you to the slate or the ballot to be voted on in the February elections at the next membership meeting. All right, I'm going to move right along here, and I'm going to introduce our main speaker. I met Rabbi David Lazar, I think about four or 5 months ago. I'm not sure exactly. Heard him speak once. Since then, we've had a couple of conversations, too short, very stimulating and informative conversations. Rabbi David Lazar is the leader of a congregation, a Jewish congregation in Palm Springs, Om Hamid-Bar, and is a dual citizen of both the U.S. and Israel. He served in the Israeli Defense Force, and I think he brings a rather, if not unique, certainly highly unusual and extraordinary view of the world and the topics he's going to talk about, which of course are always timely, but especially timely in light of the fact that what happened in Texas a week ago today, which just underscores the importance of what Rabbi David has to say. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi David, and afterwards we'll have an opportunity to ask him any questions or make any comments. David?
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the club for meeting on this Shabbat afternoon, Shabbat Shalom, this Saturday, Sabbath day. That's our way of saying happy Saturday, everyone. I want to say first and foremost, before anything else and anything comes out of my mouth from this point onward, and piggyback on what to Brandon. Brandon said that when you get to heaven, they're going to ask you to see your scars. We have a story in our tradition from 18th century rabbi in Poland whose name was Zusha. And he used to say, when I get to heaven, they're not going to ask me how come I wasn't Abraham, our father, how come I wasn't Moses, our teacher. They're going to ask me, how come I wasn't Zusha? How come I wasn't myself? And from my point of view, it's about trying to be the best that I can be as a person and not trying to be someone else. And I say this because I speak only in my own name today. This is not in the name of the rabbinate of the Jewish people. It's not in the name of the conservative movement, which is a misnomer, but I'm a rabbi ordained in the conservative movement. It's not in the name of my organization, Or Hamid-Bar, which means light in the desert. We're a 501c3, and as you well know, we can't be involved in political things as an organization, but as a private individual, I do have a lot to say. And it's not so much about who to vote for between these two fine candidates who we met just a few minutes ago. It is about values and issues. And as Stephen mentioned, everything became a little bit more real after 1 week ago, when a colleague of mine found himself with 3 of his congregants being held hostage in Texas. And you all know the story. And you also probably know that this is now being considered unanimously by FBI and all government officials to be an act of anti-Semitic hate crime and terrorism. And I say this because there is sometimes a tendency to downplay things that have been said, not in the extreme right? People seem, in my circles that I speak in, everybody seems to easily condemn the things that are said amongst white supremacists and the right wing in this country, or in other countries for that matter, in Hungary or in Germany and Sweden even, where I lived for many years, for a number of years. But in this country, often there seems to be sometimes an excuse for anti-Semitism, which it does exist in the left. It's not about does it exist in the left as much as about the right. I'm not the right person to answer that question. I just wanted to point out that it does. And when somebody says that the Jews can control things like letting a convicted criminal out of jail, out of an army jail, or other kinds of things that have to do with laser beams from heaven controlled by the Rothschild family, whatever it might be, these are anti-Semitic tropes. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to anybody here, but to remind us that anti-Semitism does exist on the left as much as it it exists on the left as it does on the right, without saying it as much. And here's the challenge. The challenge is that many would have you believe that in order to be a supporter of Israel, you must negate any kind of criticism of Israel. And I guess what I'm here to say most of all, and this is, I think, the meeting point with Stephen when he heard me speak in part of a series I was giving in Idlewild called Is Reality, about a real view of what Israel is. We were talking about the parliament that particular evening. A month later, we were talking about the settlers. And next month, we'll be talking about the ultra-Orthodox. Not to bash Israel. There was an immediate reaction in the community up on the hill in Idlewild that, well, is he going to speak positively or is he going to speak negatively? That dichotomy is a false dichotomy. I want to first establish my street cred when it comes to Israel. I lived there from age 18 until age whatever, for 40 years basically, right? I was away for 40 years, but I was in Israel for 36 years, and then 4 years in Sweden before coming back to this country 7 years ago, or 6 or 7 years ago. I left when I was 18. I moved to Israel, not because I disliked the United States, but because I bought into the Zionist vision of Jews living in the Jewish land, in the historical Jewish land, building that land, settling that land, and providing a refuge for Jews, especially after the Holocaust, but refuge for Jews from all over the world who could not necessarily be free to be Jews without persecution where they were. And that's the story of our people. Of course, that's the story of many people. And in this country today, and I'll have more to say about this in just a few minutes, in this country today, it's far more, the suffering and the persecution is far more, in my view, the story of others in the United States than it is my own people, the Jewish people in this country. And I bought into that dream so much so that after serving in the army and a study program for 5 years, I went to settle in the Gaza Strip in a legal fashion, part of the government. Some would argue that government was acting illegally, but as opposed to illegal from an Israel point of view, settlements at the time, I went with a few of my friends and we established an agricultural commune in the Gaza Strip where we lived, my wife and I, for 2 years. We farmed the land. And it wasn't until then, 82 or so, I began to revisit my political views, my religious views. At the time, I thought that Jews had a biblical right to the entire land of Israel, the biblical land of Israel. And in many opinions, that includes the Gaza Strip. In my mind, every Jew needs to support Israel. In my mind of my late teens, early 20s, a good Jew lives in Israel, but a best Jew works the land of Israel. I bought into the romanticism. But then I kind of grew up. And I'm not saying there's something ultimately wrong with that kind of romantic look at the state of Israel and building land and farming the land. But when that leads to a blindness as to the suffering of Palestinians, and Palestinians not only beyond the Green Line, but Palestinians living in the pre-67 borders of the state of Israel, not to recognize that the democracy is not all that it is supposed to be according to the way that the state of Israel was founded, then to turn a blind eye to that, to me, is unjust. It doesn't mean that I throw out Israel entirely, but it does mean that I'm willing to criticize with love and with loyalty. I spent a lot of years in the army. In Israel, you do reserve duty for many years until I was 42. I was in reserve duty 6 weeks every year. And I wasn't happy the times that we had to go into the territories during the Intifada, the first and the second Intifada, and to run after Palestinian children who had thrown rocks at us, or to go into homes in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I never had to shoot my gun at anyone. But I'm not proud of those things. And they were very, very difficult, but they did open up my eyes to another side of the state of Israel. And that's a complex reality, a truly complex reality that cannot be addressed by a Facebook, whatever you put on your Facebook page that says, I stand with Israel. It's far more complex than that. I stand with Israel. I also stand with the Palestinians. I stand with self-defense, but I also stand with human rights. And I think that is my main message more than anything else. It's a very complex picture, It needs to be looked at in a complex and a complicated way. So if, for instance, when I first got to this country in 2015, the issue was the deal with Iran that President Obama was trying to push through. And there was this perception that the Jewish people of North America were against it. And that is, there is an organization called AIPAC. Many of you know it well. Maybe some of you are members, I don't know. But AIPAC kind of led the way in saying that a supporter of Israel can only be against this. And while Bibi Netanyahu at the time was against this and went to the UN and did all sorts of, I think, unhealthy things, relationships between Israel and the United States, there were many, many military minds and security experts in the state of Israel at the time who said, no, this is the best thing we can do. And I'm not here to argue whether a new deal is the right thing or not. I don't know enough about it. All I know is that when I was here, a politician who was running for re-election came to my office one day before we were about to start the service to tell me how much the other guy was not really devoted to opposing the missile deal that he was. Just assuming, it amused me that he just assumed that I was on board. And I didn't have a talk to him because I didn't really, it wasn't important. I had to start a service, but I was absolutely in favor of that deal, even though perhaps the vast majority of Jewish organizations in this country were against. There was one organization, however, that was steadfast in its support of that deal and many other deals, and that's J Street. And if you don't know the name J Street, I'd like you all to know that. J Street is a pro-Israel, but also pro-two-state solution, which means it's pro-Palestine as well. A political organization which exists in Washington and has branches all over. Dr. Zendel has been active in the organization, others perhaps here as well. And J Street is important because it is a purely Jewish voice that says, no, there's another way. It's not all or nothing. It's a complex reality, a complicated reality. And J Street has been very much involved in a number of campaigns for Democrats across this country. It's important for us to say to our politicians, as I have said to my friend, Dr. Ruiz, that it would be good to go to Israel with J Street to understand the complexity of the issues. Not always easy to do, especially when you have two young children at home. I understand that. But J Street runs these congressional trips that are meant to educate in a different way than, say, AIPAC and some other Jewish organizations do, because the reality on the ground is highly complex. It's highly complicated. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And while you might hear people saying that the two-state solution is dead in the water, while it seems almost hopeless now, it can't be dead. It needs to persevere. The belief and the hope in it needs to persevere in one form or another, because there is no way otherwise to have a just society in that part of the world. There's no way for Israel to continue to be a democratic or a liberal democratic nation and still have second-class citizens in the way it does today. I think probably the best for me would be that if folks would like to ask questions. I'm not really involved in political organizations so much. I'm not, although I'm involved in J Street, I'm there as a rabbi. I believe in long-term commitments to study. So in our congregation, for instance, we took a year plus to study the book of Judges, the biblical book of Judges, because it is so messy, because it's so violent. It's very colorful from a literary point of view, but because it also factors into the Zionist idea, where things came from, where things stay in the minds of many people, that especially the settler movement, who believed that the land was given to the Jewish people by God, and therefore the land today is owned, or the rights to that land are God-given. I have a very different view as a rabbi, but I want us to understand where it comes from in order for us to have those very difficult conversations. First and foremost, amongst Israelis, then amongst the Jewish people and supporters of Israel, and then with those that present themselves as the enemies of Israel, the sworn enemies of Israel. The conversations need to happen.
Thank you, David. I'm going to start out with my own question here, to put what you've said into the political context that we're all here. We're all Democrats here. When I ran for Congress in 18, I was pretty far to the left on almost every issue. I was a strong supporter of Bernie Sanders. I believe in Medicare for all and most of what he stood for. But what I noticed is the further to the left that I got, the groups I would talk to and the people I would talk to, the stronger this, what you've discussed when you started out, this kind of subtle or latent anti-Semitism became more apparent. And I know that there's a lot of people who are single issue voters. And the further to the left you go, the more people who are of this single issue mindset I discovered were of that mindset when it comes to the Palestinian issue. One of my very best friends in the world, who's still one of my very best friends, is a vehement pro-Palestinian. And the conversation I had with her is, I respect your right to hold your views, but you use words in advancing your views like genocide and Jewish Nazis and things that just, to me, are horrific and inappropriate. So my question to you is, how do you respond when pro-Palestinians use phrases like that, that I think are inappropriate and non-applicable to what, no matter what's going on in Israel? I don't think it's realistic to believe the government of Israel is trying to commit genocide. I mean, that's my own personal view. How do you respond to that sort of thing?
So one of the things that I've done in my career, in my community leadership since the 90s, because I come from an Orthodox and settler background, and I shifted not only in my political beliefs, but my religious beliefs at the same time, because I was studying at Hebrew University. I was totally opened up to critical study of Bible. And I moved over a period of, say, 7-8 years. I found myself, because I know the language and the thinking of the other side, I found myself avoiding the confrontational panel type approach that you often find. For instance, I rarely agree to be on a panel of rabbis or a panel of clergy when it's an issue that's debated issue, because to me, that's not real communication. That's who has the sharpest tongue, and it's about rhetoric, and that's important, but I'm not attracted to that. And so I don't get into arguments with, I also don't have confrontation. I don't meet Palestinians that would accuse me of genocide, because I'm not on a campus. When I go to the local mosque for Jummah, for the Friday afternoon prayer, which I do quite often, not in the pandemic, but before the pandemic, because I feel it's important for us to pray together. And I know a little bit about the liturgy of Islam. And I wouldn't say I have close friends there. I have one member there is a friend. The imam, the one who was acting as an imam earlier in my tenure here, was a colleague, somebody I could pick up the phone to. But still, that I have never been accused. I don't know if they know I'm an Israeli or not, but that's never been said to me in the context of my visits to the mosque in Coachella, right? So I'm out of that way. If it was to be said to me in a calm conversation, I would absolutely explain, as you began now, that words like genocide are very, very tricky. They're very dangerous words as well, to put things into perspective. That being said, all that that needs to be corrected. And there are people like Deborah Lipstadt. May her confirmation hearing finally get done, and may she be in the job. She is perfect for that kind of work. And it's essential that we have people like that can do that. But for me, I also think that we as Jews, we need to take a deep breath and calm down a little bit. And I mean, no offense to anybody here. I know at least one of you, I know how important the memory of the Shoah, the Holocaust is. It's important to me as well, as you can imagine, but we don't have what's the word I'm looking for?
Monopoly.
Monopoly, thank you. We don't have a monopoly on suffering. We don't. Not as a people, not as individuals. And even last week, as horrible it is, and as horrible as a few years ago in Pennsylvania or in Poway, as horrible as those things are, there are equally and far more horrible things going on in Black churches and on the streets all across the United States and in other parts of the world. That we need to put things into perspective. And we can't always continuously claim you have no right to call us into question because of the Holocaust, for instance, or because missiles are coming over from Gaza. Yeah, it's not so simple. It's not black and white, and it didn't start right now. It didn't start yesterday. It didn't start in 67. I'm sorry, I'm shouting. I'm getting a little too passionate here. I apologize. It didn't start in 67. It didn't even start in 48. And the truth of the matter is it didn't even start in the late 19th century when Jews started to move to Israel and the movement for political Zionism began to be birthed, right? It's something deep inside cultures that are claiming to be the same land. We need to look at ourselves, and I say this to you, Stephen, as well as Jews, as we talk, or as in a less passionate way, defending ourselves against that strong language. We need to look at our sources, what our sources say. And the book of Judges and other biblical sources are pretty difficult to swallow. So I say it not because we need to be embarrassed about it, but we need to put things into perspective. We have come a long way. Zionism needs to come.
I think that what happens is it is so much easier intellectually and emotionally to scapegoat a single group than it is to acknowledge the reality of what you just described, the complexity of the suffering everywhere. It's easy to blame a single group for everything, which some people have used Jewish people to do, than it is to acknowledge, the Blacks, the Muslims, the Latinos, the poor people. They're all getting a raw deal, equally as bad sometimes as the Jewish people. So it's easy to just blame one group for everything. Sometimes, Trump did it with immigrants. So I think that's sometimes the psychology of what happens. So I'm going to open it up. Les, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead. You guys know each other, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So, Rabbi, I don't want to open up too big of a topic here, but I know that Americans who kind of, especially Democrats, are bemoaning the fact that our country is so divided between right and left, Republican and Democrat. Sometimes when they think about Israel, they think, well, is it the same there? And of course, it's not. It's a very complicated political story and situation. I wonder if you could just take a minute to explain the complexity of the Israeli politics and why that makes it sometimes difficult to know what, quote, the Israeli point of view is.
Sure. Well, so this is where I would say you should have been at the lecture about the Knesset, about the Israeli parliament. That was exactly it. And it is complex. Les, I remember getting here, and when did I come? I didn't live here as an adult, right? Until I was in my 60s or late 50s. I remember getting here and seeing this tension already under President Obama and suspecting that it was a lot more than just objecting to one policy or another, that had a lot more to do with race. And all this was new to me because it wasn't the issues I was dealing with in my rabbinate in my life. And then seeing that people were no longer socializing with each other. Members of the same synagogue wouldn't go out with because of different views. Of course, things got a lot more difficult and ugly through social media. And I remember saying to people in Israel, we often disagree. We shout at each other in a far more violent way, vocally violent way than in this country. And then you go out and have a beer together because we serve in the army together in the same unit, because you're living in the same building. The neighborhoods are not so distinct. It's for all sorts of reasons. And the proof is in the pie. The pie of the last, 8 months or so has been that in Israel, there's a coalition, as many of you know, it's a coalition government, it's not a two-party system, it's a coalition. And in that coalition are, I would say, far right, maybe not farthest right, but far right parties and Palestinian Arab parties. The party that I voted for all the years in Israel, Meretz, the left-wing party, is in the same coalition as somebody who is fighting against all the things that Meretz stand for, and they're figuring out a way to make it work. Not true. They've all come together because of their hatred or this dislike of Bibi. And if Bibi is barred from politics now, as very well may happen because of his legal issues, then the coalition might very well fall apart. But that's why it's just so much more complicated. And not only is there no, let me leave it at that. Let me leave it at that.
I'm gonna Patrick and then Dale, is that?
That's me.
All right, Patrick, you ask your question and then we'll go to Dale.
Yeah, as a delegate to the Democratic Party in California and conversing with other delegates and stuff and Democrats, one of the things that I hear a lot is race. When Israel is brought up, race is brought up. When Jews are brought up, race is brought up. And then there's this stereotype that Jews are white, wealthy, etc. That we're all white and wealthy and blah blah blah. And this comes from what I consider the far left attitude. But in my own learning about Israel and race, the issue is not race at all, from what I understand. In fact, people that we consider people of color in Israel are the majority of the people who had voted for Netanyahu again and again. And our definition of race in the United States might be different than the definition of race in Israel. So if you can dispel some of the myths and stereotypes about Jews and race and Israel and race, which is pretty rampant on the far left, I think that would be appreciated by many people.
Patrick, I don't know that I can. I'm not sure I entirely understand and follow it, because they're very, very different realities. You said that those that are well, I will explain to what you said about that. Much of the support for the right in Israel comes from those Israelis that have a Mizrahi background, which means an Eastern background. There are Jews that came to Israel, in many cases were brought to Israel, in some cases they were brought almost against their will, if you can believe that, in the late 40s and in the 50s from countries that were Islamic countries, North Africa, Iraq, Iran, to a lesser degree from Turkey, from Yemen, for instance, and that's very complex because they were absolutely treated as second-class citizens. That I say absolutely, and any history book today will tell you that in Israel, by the Ashkenazic, that is the Eastern and Central European, not aristocrats because they had money, but because they'd been involved in the Zionist process. Nobody had money at the time in Israel, but they were the establishment. And so the reaction to that, it took a few decades, but the reaction to that was in the 80s finally, where they finally kind of, already in the 70s, bubbled up. In fact, one of the groups called themselves the Black Panthers. They took the name from American history, and so that created a very different kind of a dynamic. But race, Patrick, is very much part of it, very much part of it. And when Ethiopian Jews were brought to Israel, although I'm very, very proud of the fact that happened and it's still happening almost now, it's just finishing up right now. Ethiopian Jews have been treated poorly in the state of Israel. And all the more so, by the way, refugees, economic and political refugees from Africa who are not Jewish. So race, unfortunately, does play the same way, but it plays in a different way. Race is also in Israeli politics and society, but it plays out in a very, very different way. Um, uh, yeah. And then, by the way, on top of race, you have religious issues, those that are more traditional, those that are less traditional, and those who are part of the Mizrahi, that part of Israeli population who is the majority, not just the majority of Likud supporters, of the right-wing supporters, but the majority of the state of Israel. They tend to be more traditional from a religious point of view, not necessarily Orthodox, but more traditional. So it's extremely complicated. And then you have lots of policies that are set in Israel, back to Les's comment before. And I'd forgotten that the first time I gave that lecture about the Israeli parliament was actually in Les's house, but it was a few years ago. I'd forgotten that in Israel, because of this complexity of parliamentary coalitions, if one party has the thing that they really want to happen and they hold the linchpin to the coalition, they get it. Whether it has to do with Orthodox law, Orthodox Jewish effect on the law, or whether it has to do with the settlement movement, or many other things. So I can't dispel it. What I will say also, Patrick, is that very often you hear in the Jewish world, I hear amongst my colleagues, rabbinic colleagues, that they're adverse to hearing the fact that Jews are part of the white, have white entitlement, right? In this country. To my view, Jews are very much part of the white part, not white supremacists, I would hope, but we're very much part of we're white in this country. I don't think that we're ethnic in that way. That's my own view, and I know many people differ, but so.
Yeah, I didn't really want to hear that. What I wanted to hear was that not all Jews are white. That's what I wanted to hear.
Patrick, you probably should have said that.
30% of the Jewish population in the United States, it's people of color, and people have this stereotype that all Jews are white and wealthy. And it's not true that all Jews are white, because 13% identify as people of color in the United States. So that's what I was referring to.
Then you probably should have said that, Patrick. Please go ahead. Next question.
Gail, would you like to ask a question?
I would, thank you. First of all, I'm so thankful that I came and I listened to you today. I have been troubled by the relationship or lack thereof between the Palestinians and the Jews. And when I hear of not so nice things happening to the Palestinians, I get angry and I say, when does this change? When does it get better? When does this stop? And I, of course, feel the same way about the way my people are treated here in the United States of America. I'm troubled by it. It hurts me to my soul to see anyone discriminated against because of who they are. I had nothing to do with being born Black. Neither did the Palestinians being born Palestinian. And I'm glad to hear you say that you are involved in working with the groups. What's going to happen? How does this improve? How does it get better?
Okay, so I put in the chat links to something from J Street about two-state solution, and Representative Levin of Michigan's bill that I personally asked Congressman Ruiz to support. Not getting a lot of support from many of the Democratic members of Congress. Maybe it just takes a long time, but more than anything else, it's important to raise some of the issues, and you can read more about that in the link in the chat box. The second link is a group of Jewish Israelis and Palestinians who are trying to think, okay, how might this work? When you read that document, you may say, roll your eyes and say, oh, that's never going to work, but it's got to start someplace. And that's one place that it might start, figuring out, okay, we have these facts on the ground. How do we do it? You can't just simply press a reset button. Everybody can go back to the way it was before 1948 or before 1967, or how it was in 1881 when the first Jews escaped the pogroms in Eastern Europe to come to Israel. I mean, some did, right? But there are people that think about it. And another thing, Dal, is there are some organizations, they're not a lot, but I'm sorry, it's Dale, not Dal. I don't have my glasses on. So,
That's okay.
okay. There are organizations, not a lot of them, and some of them are literally persecuted by the previous Israeli government, funding cut off, sometimes by Israeli or by American Jewish organizations. They're left out of the circle because they're perceived to be a fifth column, if you will. Some of the promising organizations are youth education, summer camp programs, exchange programs. But I want to be honest about this, they're very small, very narrow. And sometimes they're more popular amongst progressive American Jews than they are amongst Israelis. Because in Israel, there's a lot of issues that seem to keep this far away, right? The economy for more, although we hear a lot about how many millionaires are in Israel now and even billionaires, still there's a huge disparity. I don't know what the percentage of it is greater than in this country, but a huge disparity, lots of economic problems. I know that because I have 4 daughters who live in Israel and all their friends who can't even imagine owning any kind of a flat, an apartment or a house or anything, and have a constant overdraft in the bank. There are issues of Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the constant threat in that way. There was now, of course, a pandemic like everywhere else, but those are things that they push this issue to the side because it's so complicated and so hard. So come rabbis like me, I was a member of an organization called Rabbis for Human Rights. When I lived in Israel, there is a parallel organization here in the United States called Truah. And what we do is little by little, incremental kinds of things, meeting people, having this kind of a talk with you folks, right? Something that I wouldn't have done, by the way, when I was at a larger synagogue, when I first got to Palm Springs, I don't think I could have done this. I think it would have been taken the wrong way by many of the members of the congregation. And perhaps they're right. They were an established congregation that asked me to be a rabbi. Now I'm the rabbi of an organization that I started myself. So the people that are with us, they know who they're getting. Yet I once again remind you, everything I've said is in my own name and not in the name of the organization. So it starts with it starts like here in this country as well. It starts with the little stuff. It starts with talking to our neighbors and our family members, even though we can't for the life of us understand why they won't wear a mask or why they won't get vaccinated or how could they possibly have voted for that guy. We gotta talk to them. You gotta figure out what's common and create civil, polite, not polite, that's a bad word, but civil and respectful conversations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank
So
you.
I have a short question and then I'm going to turn to Steve Brooks, who's got his hand up as well. There are organizations that I encountered one of them is called Jewish Voices for Peace. They're here in the US. Are you familiar with them, David?
Yeah, I don't have any personal familiarity with the organization. They are considered to be at the very left of Jewish organizations.
Right.
And
So here's my question. If they don't want a 2-state solution, they feel that we're expelling Palestinians from what now is Israel, and they consider that wrong. But what I don't know is when you get to that far left area, because they asked me to endorse some of their positions, which I respectfully declined when I was running. But what I don't know is what they want. I know what they don't want. What do they want? Where are they? Where are they on the spectrum there?
So I don't want to speak in the name of another organization that I'm not totally.
What do you understand? What do you understand they want?
But I will say there are even Jewish Israelis who I've studied with. I was at an institution called the Jerusalem Fellows in the late 90s. I was absolutely blessed by the Mandel Foundation to be able to take off from my work as a rabbi and sit and think for 2 years, a 2-year fellowship. But what a gift. And there were people in that fellowship program, Jews, that absolutely believed already then in a 1-state solution, which is a state that is governed by the full population of that state. Let it be one country And of course, the Jewish, it will no longer be a Jewish state. They no longer had a belief in the classical idea of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. It's a state where the people that live there, they govern like many other places, like the United States, right? And what will happen, of course, the fear of the Jewish Israel, the traditional Jewish understanding of Israel is that it will no longer be a Jewish state. The calendar won't be a Jewish calendar. You won't get off for Passover necessarily. You have to ask to get off, like in this country, or for the other holidays. And Jews will soon, because of the demographics, will be in the minority, right? Very soon, if not already, certainly in some areas. And that's the fear, the Jewish fear of, again, being outcast and suffering. And I understand that. That's why the second link that I put in the chat box is a helpful way to think about what a two-state solution might look like in light of the reality today. But what they want, what some people want, even in the Jewish world, is the same that what many Palestinians want: the entire land back. The way they understand it was their land before. And historically speaking, there have always been Jews living in the land of Israel. There's one village in the Galil in northern Israel that's been continuously populated by Jews all through the 2,000 years of Jews living spread across the world, but it's only one place. But still, there's been a Jewish presence in Israel for much of the last 2,000 years. That being said, it's been a very, very small minority.
Thank you. Steve Brooks, your question.
Well, you beat me to it, but I was going to ask, if you had interactions with JVP and your thoughts on it, but it's already been asked. So there we go.
Maybe I'll just add one more thing with JVP. The challenge there is that if that organization doesn't have, the way I see it, my perception, have very much influence, certainly not positive influence, on the rest of the Jewish world. Most Jews they feel bad. If JVP takes a position, they automatically won't listen, I think, because they've gone beyond the brink. I'm not saying they're beyond the brink, but for many Jews it is. And then as an organization, as individuals, you have to ask yourself from a purely political point of view, is that helping, or is that getting in the way of helping? And again, this isn't the topic today, JVP, I'm not an expert, but that is in any position. What point do you lose relevance? At what point do you cease to be relevant to the group that you're trying to influence?
Well, can I just say, I think there's a difference opinion in the community about the practicality of a two-state solution that has changed over the years to become less and less of a practical solution because of the number of settlers and so on and so forth, that the facts on the ground have been purposely moved in that direction, making it sort of a fantasy of having a two-state solution as opposed to it being more of a realistic thing 30 or 40 years ago, or, after 1967, say. So I think there is some disagreement in the community on whether that's really a fantasy or a real possibility, something that could actually happen.
Oh, absolutely. And so that's why I put those two links in the chat box. One is I think it's a fantasy to think that the Two-State Solution Act is going to get voted on, approved anytime soon. But that's a statement in putting it out there by Congressman Levin. But the A Land for All is, many people will say it's naive, totally naive, but it's an attempt to take into consideration the facts on the ground and to still come up with some sort of a solution, which in the eyes of those, and I count myself amongst them, still feel will be better than a one-state solution.
All right. Wow, I could listen to this. This is very good discussion, in my opinion. And I think it serves a very good purpose. There's an old saying that almost everybody's heard of, which is you put 5 Jewish people in a room and ask an opinion and you'll get 6 or 7 different opinions. This is a good example of that. I think there's been some provocative discussion, and but that's not bad. That's not always bad. So we are just past 3 o'clock. Unless anybody has any more questions, and you're welcome to ask, I'm going to wrap it up. David, I can't thank you enough for your candor and your valuable information. I think you've provided a true learning experience for some people who are not as familiar with the issues as some others of us. And we hope to have you back sometime in the future. Thank you very much. Unless anybody has any further business, I think I'm going to conclude the meeting. So thank you all. Fourth Saturday of February. I'll keep track of the months here. Fourth Saturday of February, we will reconvene. I would remind you, if you're interested in any of the executive board positions that I listed, secretary, program director, or hospitality chair, let me know, please. We need you. The club is doing fine. We're robust. I think our last few meetings have been particularly good, and we want to continue to be as robust as we have been. Thank you very much. Goodbye to all.
Why? Thank you.